The shove from my own son echoed louder than the sound of my body crashing onto the marble floor. In that moment, surrounded by 30 stunned guests, I felt the kind of humiliation that burns deeper than pain. They all stared, some in shock, others in judgment, as Michael, my only child, shouted that I was a terrible mother. He demanded I hand over my $900,000 home to his wife, Jessica. She deserves more than you. Mom, much more, he spat before pushing me. But what I did after rising from that cold floor changed everything forever. That morning had started so differently. I'd woken at 5 a.m., my heart filled with excitement and hope. It was Jessica's 32nd birthday, and I wanted, no needed, to show her that I could be the kind, loving mother-in-law she always deserved. The kitchen smelled of sweet tres leches cake as I whisked meringue into glossy perfection, just like my grandmother had taught me decades ago. My hands, aged and worn from 67 years of hard work, shook slightly as I added the final touches. The cake had to be perfect, just like everything else I'd planned for the day. I had spent over $500 on gourmet ingredients, exotic flowers and elegant decor, money I couldn't really spare, but Jessica was worth every penny. Golden sunlight streamed through my kitchen window, glinting off the spotless tiles I had scrubbed until they shone like glass. This house, my $900,000 sanctuary, as the appraiser called it, was so much more than just a building. It was 30 years of double shifts and sleepless nights, the tears of a widow who raised her son alone, and the dreams of a woman who refused to give up. Every inch of it carried my story. The Italian leather sofa I bought when Michael graduated, the solid oak dining table I chose, imagining the family dinners we'd share when he got married, and yet, that very home, the symbol of everything I had built and loved, became the battlefield where my son betrayed me. The crystal chandeliers were my gift to myself the day I paid off the final mortgage payment. Everything had meaning, everything had a soul. The phone interrupted my thoughts as I placed the fondant roses on the cake. Evelyn will be there at 2 p.m. sharp. Jessica's voice sounded different, more commanding than usual. I hope you have everything perfect. Today is a very special day for me. Of course, sweetie. I've prepared all your favorite dishes and perfect. Michael and I have something very important to tell you today. Something about my future and what I truly deserve in this life. Thayline went dead. A strange chill ran down my spine, but I chalked it up to the nerves of wanting everything to be perfect. They were surely going to give me the news I had been waiting for, a grandchild. The thought filled me with a warmth that spread from my chest to my fingertips. I ran to the bathroom to fix myself up for the 5th time that morning. The salmon-colored dress I had chosen flattered me, though it couldn't hide the expression lines that told the story of a lifetime dedicated to others. I applied a little more blush, wanting to look radiant for my daughter-in-law. The entire house breathed celebration. I had lit jasmine-scented candles in every room, flowers from the garden decorated every surface, and I had even hired a woman to help serve. Everything had to be perfect for Jessica. I spent the next hour obsessively arranging every detail. The silver cutlery gleamed like mirrors on the mahogany table. The fine china was perfectly aligned, and I had folded the linen napkins into swans, just as my mother had taught me decades ago when she worked at the most elegant hotel in the city. The menu I had prepared was worthy of a 5-star restaurant. Shrimp scampi grilled salmon with mango salsa, quinoa salad with dried fruits, and of course, the 3-milk cake I had perfected over the years. Each dish was one of Jessica's favorites, memorized from our few intimate conversations. As I checked the oven temperature for the 10th time, I remembered the words Michael had told me the week before. Mom, Jessica always says how lucky she feels to have you as a mother-in-law. She says she's never met anyone so generous and caring. Those words had fed me soul for days. At exactly 2 p.m, the engine of Michael's BMW roared into my driveway. My heart began to race as I walked to the front door, smoothing my dress one last time. I had dreamed of this moment for weeks, imagining the surprise in Jessica's eyes when she saw everything I had prepared for her. I opened the door with the most sincere smile I had, but what I saw deeply unsettled me. Jessica was wearing a blood red dress I'd never seen before, gold jewelry that shone like tiny suns, and a designer handbag that cost more than my monthly retirement check. Her eyes scanned my house as if she were an appraiser evaluating a property. Happy birthday, my beautiful girl, I said, opening my arms to welcome her. The hug she gave back was as cold as January ice. Her arms wrapped around mechanically as she whispered in my ear with a voice I didn't recognize. "Thanks, Evelyn. I hope you're ready to hear what I have to say. Today, some things are going to change for good." Michael appeared behind her, carrying a bottle of expensive champagne and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. My son, my only son, the man I had raised with so much love and sacrifice, greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that felt like a farewell. "Mom, the house looks amazing," he said, as his eyes also scanned every corner with a look I couldn't decipher. "Jessica and I have a lot to celebrate today." The first guests started arriving at 3 in the afternoon, and I was floating with happiness, watching everyone praise my home's decor. I had invited Michael's coworkers, some of Jessica's friends he barely knew, and my closest neighbors. I wanted it to be a memorable celebration worthy of my daughter-in-law, Evelyn. "Everything is spectacular," Mrs. Martinez told me, admiring the white orchid centerpiece. "You can tell you've put your heart into every detail." I smiled with pride as I served the shrimp scampi on small porcelain plates. Every positive comment fueled my hope that Jessica would finally see me as the mother-in-law she had always dreamed of having. But something strange started to happen as the afternoon wore on. Jessica acted like the perfect hostess, receiving congratulations and gifts with a radiant smile. But every time someone praised me for organizing the party, she would subtly interrupt the conversation. When Mrs. Gonzalez complimented me on the grilled salmon, Jessica immediately started talking about her new job at the real estate firm. When my neighbor George praised the floral arrangements, she changed the subject to her remodeling plans. At first, I thought they were coincidences, the natural nerves of being the center of attention. But when my good friend Louis said in front of everyone, "Evelyn, you are an exceptional hostess. This house is a true palace," Jessica let out a strange little laugh and replied, "Yes. It's a shame some people cling so tightly to material things when they could be more generous with family." The comment landed like a rock in my stomach, but I tried to ignore it. Maybe I had misunderstood her words. Maybe I was being too sensitive. I retreated to the kitchen to bring out the cake, hoping the birthday song would ease the tension I was starting to feel in there. As I lit the 32 candles, I heard snippets of conversation from the living room. Jessica was talking to her friends about selfish women who don't know how to share and possessive, mothers-in-law who don't understand the sacrifices young wives make. Every word was like a needle piercing my chest. But I convinced myself she wasn't talking about me. I brought the cake into the living room, my hands trembling slightly. Everyone applauded and began to sing happy birthday. Jessica smiled radiantly as I held the cake in front of her, waiting for that magical moment when she would blow out the candles and make a wish. But when the song ended, instead of blowing out the candles, Jessica took my hand tightly and said loudly for everyone to hear, "Before I make my wish, I want to thank Evelyn for this beautiful party. Though I must admit, I'm surprised by all this generosity coming from someone who is usually so reserved with her things." An awkward silence filled the room. Some guests exchanged confused glances as I tried to process what I had just heard. Reserved with my things, I had given her jewelry for her last birthday. I always brought food over to her house. I had paid for half of their honeymoon when they had financial trouble. "I don't understand, sweetie," I managed to whisper, feeling all eyes on me. Jessica let go of my hand and smiled with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, it's nothing bad, Evelyn. It's just that some people of your generation tend to be very attached to material possessions. My mom always says that true generosity comes from giving without expecting anything in return." The comparison to her mother was like a slap in the face. Her mother, who lived in a rented apartment and had never been able to give her a tenth of what I had given my family. Her mother, who only appeared in their lives after Michael got a good job. Her mother, who always found a way to indirectly criticize everything I did. Jessica is right. Michael suddenly chimed in, appearing beside me with a glass of champagne. "Mom, sometimes you give the impression that material things are more important than people." My world tilted. My own son, the man I had raised with so much love, was backing up his wife's hurtful words in front of all our guests. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks and my hands began to shake uncontrollably. I have always given everything for you," I murmured, my voice breaking. "Of course you have, Mom," Michael said with a condescending smile I had never seen before. But giving and sharing are different things. Sharing requires real detachment, not just loans or occasional gifts. The guests started muttering among themselves, some clearly uncomfortable with where the conversation was heading. I felt like I was in a nightmare, as if these two people I loved more than life itself had become cruel strangers. "Come on, blow out the candles," someone said from the back, trying to ease the tension. Jessica finally blew out the candles, but before I could react, she leaned into my ear and whispered so low only I could hear, "I already know my wish. Evelyn and you are going to help me make it come true." The conversation after the candles changed the course of the entire evening. As I cut the cake with trembling hands, Jessica began telling anecdotes about young couples struggling to make it on their own and the importance of older generations understanding when it's time to pass the torch. Every word was a poison dart aimed straight at my heart. "It's amazing how some mothers become so possessive of their sons," commented one of her friends, a blonde woman I had never seen before. My sister-in-law had to set very clear boundaries with her mother-in-law to have peace in her marriage. Jessica nodded emphatically while looking at me meaningfully. "Exactly, Anna. Some women confuse motherly love with control. They don't understand that clinging so tightly to things and people only creates suffering." I felt as if I had been publicly slapped. There I was, the woman who had sacrificed everything for her son, being described as controlling and possessive in front of people I barely knew. My hands trembled so much I almost dropped the cake knife. "I have never controlled Michael," I managed to whisper, my voice cracking. "I have always respected his decisions." "Of course you have, Mom." Michael intervened with that new condescending smile that made my blood run cold. But there are subtle forms of control that we sometimes don't even realize we're exercising. The whole room watched me as if I were a specimen in a lab. Some guests looked uncomfortable. Others were frankly curious about the drama unfolding before their eyes. I felt naked, exposed, humiliated in my own home in front of people I had invited with such affection. For example, Jessica continued accepting a piece of my cake with feigned gratitude. When an older person clings to a large house, knowing that there are young couples who really need stability and space to grow, the comment dropped like a bomb in the middle of the room. Now I understood where this whole orchestrated conversation was headed. It wasn't about control or possessiveness. It was about my house, my beautiful $900,000 house that I had built with 30 years of sweat and tears. "This house is very big for one person," the blonde friend added, looking around with feigned admiration. "It must be very expensive to maintain, too." "Oh yes," Jessica sighed dramatically. "Michael and I live in such a small apartment we can barely fit. We've been saving for our own house, but you know how real estate prices are these days?" My heart started beating so hard I feared everyone could hear it. Slowly, like pieces of a macabre puzzle, I began to understand what was happening. This was not a birthday party. It was a carefully planned ambush. "Mom." Mikkel approached me with an expression that pretended to be caring, but which I could now clearly see as manipulative. "Jessica and I have been talking about our family's future." "What future?" I asked in a thin voice, though I already dreaded the answer. Well, Jessica took the floor with a smile I could now see in all its falseness. "We thought it would be wonderful if we could live here with you. This house is perfect for a growing family." "Live with me," I repeated, feeling as if I were in an alternate dimension. "Note exactly," Michael intervened quickly. "What Jessica means is that maybe it's time for you to consider moving into something smaller and more comfortable for your age, and we could take over the house." The world stopped around me. The guests' voices became a distant murmur, as if I were underwater. My own son was asking me to leave my home, the place where I had built all my memories, where I had raised my family, where I planned to grow old with dignity. But this is my house," I murmured, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. "Of course it's your house, Mom," Michael said in that patronizing voice he used when he thought I didn't understand something. "But think about it logically. You don't need this much space anymore. And we really do. Besides," Jessica added with a venomous smile, "it would be such a beautiful way to show how much you love your son. Imagine what a wonderful gift it would be for our new chapter as a family." I looked around the room and saw the faces of the guests. Some looked horrified by what they were witnessing. Others were clearly enjoying the drama. But what hurt the most was seeing that no one, absolutely no one, came to my defense. "I need some air," I managed to say, feeling the walls of my own living room closing in on me. "Mom, don't be dramatic," Michael said with irritation. "We're just talking about future possibilities." But I couldn't listen anymore. The sound of my own heart breaking drowned out all the other voices. I ran to the kitchen, stumbling slightly as I heard Jessica say to the guests, "Please excuse Evelyn. Sometimes women her age get very emotional about these things." The laughter that followed her comment was the straw that broke the camel's back. I took refuge in my kitchen with a shattered heart, my hands trembling as I clung to the marble sink I had chosen so carefully 5 years ago. The laughter of the guests carried in from the living room like daggers, and among them I heard Jessica's voice explaining my emotional episode with that fake sweetness I now recognized perfectly. "Poor Evelyn," I heard her say. "Sometimes older women cling so tightly to material things that they forget what really matters, family." I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, but every inhale felt like shattered glass in my lungs. 30 years paying a mortgage, 30 years working double shifts at the textile factory, 30 years dreaming of the day I could finally rest in my own home. And now my own son wanted to snatch it away to give to his wife. The sound of approaching footsteps made me lift my head. It was Michael with that expression of false concern he had perfected over the last few months. "Mom, are you okay? The guests are asking for you." "How could you do this to me, Michael?" I asked, my voice broken. "How could you ask me to leave my home?" He sighed as if I were the one being irrational. "Mom, nobody is asking you to leave anything. We're just suggesting a natural transition. You could move into a comfortable apartment without the responsibilities of maintaining such a large house." "An apartment?" I repeated, feeling rage begin to mix with my pain. "After everything I've worked for to have this house." "Look, Mom." His voice grew harder, more like Jessica's. "Jessica and I are young. We have our whole lives ahead of us. We need space to grow as a family. You've already had your time with a big house." His words hit me like hammer blows. "I've had my time." My voice rose an octave. "Does being retired mean I no longer deserve a decent home?" "Don't say that. You're twisting my words." Michael stepped closer, and for the first time in my life, his presence didn't calm me. "Just think how happy you would be knowing you gave your son the chance to be successful." At that moment, Jessica appeared in the kitchen doorway with that hyena smile I had learned to recognize. "Evelyn, dear, the guests, they're wondering where the hostess is," she said in a syrupy voice that turned my stomach. "It would be a shame for your own party to be ruined by such a simple conversation." "It's not my birthday," I muttered. "It's yours." "Exactly," she said, approaching like a predator stalking its prey. "And as a birthday gift, I would love for you to consider our proposal." "It would be so generous of you." Generous. The word escaped my lips like poison. "Giving away my house is generous." Well, Jessica exchanged a conspiratorial look with Michael. "Technically, it wouldn't be giving it away. We could make a legal arrangement where you retain certain rights, but we would take over the responsibilities." My blood ran cold. They had thought of everything. This wasn't a spontaneous conversation. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to strip me of my assets. "You've already spoken to lawyers." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Michael at least had the decency to look slightly ashamed. "We've only consulted on some legal options, Mom, to protect everyone's interests." "My interests?" He felt anger beginning to overpower the pain. "Which of my interests are protected if I end up homeless?" "Evelyn, don't be so dramatic." Jessica placed her hand on my shoulder, and her touch burned like acid. "No one is going to leave you homeless. We could find you a beautiful apartment downtown." "Find me with what money?" "With my retirement pension that barely covers my basic expenses?" Well, Jessica's smile became even more sinister. "Part of the value of this house could be used to secure your future. It would be like an investment." There it was, the naked, cruel truth. They wanted my house and were willing to leave me with crumbs to get it. My own son had conspired with his wife to strip me of everything I had built. "Get out of my house," I whispered. "What?" Michael seemed genuinely surprised. I said, "Get out of my house now." "Mom, you're being irrational." Michael raised his voice. "We have guests out there. Can't you just— I don't care about the guests." I shouted with a strength I didn't know. "I still want you out of my house, immediately." The words left my mouth like shards of glass. Jessica and Michael exchanged a look, one I'd never seen before. There was something chilling in their eyes. Determination. Defiance. They weren't backing down. "All right, Mom," Michael said, his voice eerily calm. "If that's your final decision, then I'll have to take measures." "What measures?" I asked, though part of me already feared the answer. "Measures to protect my family's future," he replied coldly, slipping his arm around Jessica. "Even if that means protecting you from yourself." Then he turned and walked out, hand in hand with his wife, leaving me alone in the kitchen, my heart splintered into 1,000 pieces. Moments later, I heard voices from the living room, low at first, then growing louder. When I finally gathered the courage to step out, I froze in the doorway. Michael stood before our guests, 30 people I had fed, welcomed, and treated like family, and began his performance. "Mom has decided to be incredibly selfish today," he announced, his voice heavy with fake sadness but dripping with venom. "We asked her for a small favor, a gesture of love toward her only daughter-in-law, and she refused." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I could feel their eyes turning toward me, filled with judgment and unease. Jessica sat elegantly on my Italian leather sofa, dabbing fake tears with a napkin as her friends surrounded her like sympathetic angels. "Poor Jessica," whispered a blonde woman, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It must be so hard having such an unkind mother-in-law. I've never had problems with mine," another chimed in smugly. "But of course, she's always been so generous." Each word hit me like a slap. These same people who had eaten my food, laughed in my home, and toasted under my roof, now whispered about me as if I were a villain. I took a few steps forward, my knees trembling, feeling as though I were walking toward my own execution. Then Evelyn, my neighbor, approached with concern etched across her face. "Is it true, dear? You don't want to help Michael and Jessica with their housing situation?" Before I could even open my mouth, Michael rose dramatically, seizing the moment. "Mom lives all alone in this massive $900,000 house," he declared, voice rising for effect, "while Jessica and I are stuck in a cramped apartment. We just asked her to consider a simple transition, something that would help all of us. But she refused." "It's not a transition," I managed to say, my voice shaking. "But the room had already chosen its side. They are asking me to gift them my house." "That's not true." Jessica jumped from the sofa with this time, more convincing tears. "We just wanted you to consider sharing this space with your family, but you prefer cold walls to the company of the people who love you." The murmur of disapproval from the guests grew louder. I felt the floor move beneath my feet. These two people had turned my generosity into selfishness, my home into a whim, my motherly love into toxic possessiveness. "Michael." My voice was barely a whisper. "This house is all I have. It's my security, my future, my memories. And we're your family," he shouted, approaching me with eyes blazing with rage. "Jessica's your daughter-in-law. She deserves to have a dignified life. She deserves more than you." The phrase echoed in the room like thunder. "She deserves more than you." The words that had been dancing around the entire conversation had finally been spoken with crystal clarity. "More than me," I repeated, feeling something break inside me for good. Yes. Michael was out of control now. All his pretenses of kindness had vanished. She's young. She has her whole life ahead of her. She can do something productive with this property. You're just wasting it. "Michael, please." Jessica pretended to try to calm him, but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. This was exactly what she had planned. "No, Jessica, it's time for Mom to hear the truth," he continued yelling as he got closer to me. "You've been selfish your whole life, always thinking only of yourself. You've never considered what's best for the family. I raised you alone," I whispered, feeling the tears start to fall. "I worked 2 jobs to give you everything. I sacrificed my youth, my dreams, everything for you. And now it's time for you to pay back that sacrifice," he roared. "Jessica deserves to have the life I could never give you. She deserves more than a selfish old woman clinging to material things." The guests watched in horror as my son emotionally destroyed me in front of everyone. But the worst was yet to come. "Mom," his voice became dangerously calm, "if you don't sign the papers to transfer this property voluntarily, I'll have to seek other legal alternatives." "What alternatives?" I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. Jessica approached with a triumphant smile. "We've consulted with lawyers who specialize in cases of elderly adults who cannot make rational decisions about their assets." The air left my lungs. "Are you threatening to have me declared incompetent?" "Only if you force us to." Michael crossed his arms. "But it would be much easier if you just agreed to do the right thing." "The right thing." My voice rose to a scream. "The right thing is to steal the house from a 67-year-old woman. You don't need this house." Michael completely lost his temper. "Jessica needs it more. She deserves more than you." And then it happened. I approached him, my own son, with tears streaming down my cheeks. And I screamed at him with all the strength I had left. "This is my house. I bought it with my work. I am not giving it to anyone." Michael looked at me with pure contempt, raised his hand, and pushed me with such force that I fell to the marble floor in front of all the guests. The silence that followed was deafening. From the cold floor of my own living room looking up at my son, who had pushed me, I felt something fundamental break inside my soul. The physical pain of the fall was nothing compared to the agony of seeing the 30 people I had invited to my home watching me as if I were a crushed insect. No one moved to help me. No one said a word in my defense. "Look what you made me do!" Michael yelled, pointing at me as I tried to get up. "This is your fault for being so stubborn and selfish." Jessica covered her mouth with both hands, feigning horror. But through her fingers, I could see a smile of satisfaction. This was exactly what she had orchestrated. She wanted me to look humiliated, defeated, vulnerable in front of witnesses. "Michael, you shouldn't have, my neighbor," George muttered, but his voice sounded more concerned about the scene than my well-being. She asked for it. My son roared completely out of control. Offered her a dignified solution, and she chose to play the victim. I managed to get to my feet, my legs trembling, feeling all eyes in the room judging me. My salmon-colored dress was wrinkled. My hair was a mess, and I could feel a bruise forming on my right hip. But what hurt the most was the look of contempt from my own son. "I think you should all leave," I managed to whisper, addressing the guests who seemed paralyzed by the tension. "Excellent idea," Jessica said in a syrupy voice, approaching me with that fake concern I now recognized perfectly. "Evelyn needs time to reflect on her priorities." The guests began to move slowly toward the door, some muttering among themselves, others simply escaping the discomfort. I heard snippets of conversation. "Poor Jessica, what a difficult situation. Older women sometimes become very stubborn." No one said goodbye to me. Noon asked if I was okay. 30 people left my house without a single word of support or comfort. It was as if I had ceased to exist as a human being and had become the selfish obstacle Jessica had painted me to be. When everyone had finally left, only the 3 of us remained in my living room. The silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock that had belonged to my mother. "Mom," Michael spoke in a tired voice as if he were the one who had suffered all afternoon. "You can still make the right decision. We can fix this in a civilized way." I looked into his eyes, those eyes that had been my greatest pride when he was a child, and I saw a stranger, a man who'd inherited my blood but not my heart, a man capable of pushing his own mother for money. "Out!" I whispered. "What?" he asked as if he hadn't heard clearly. "Out of my house," I shouted with a strength I didn't know I still possessed. "Both of you out!" Jessica approached with that perfected venomous smile. "Evelyn, you're upset. Maybe you should rest and tomorrow we can." "There is no tomorrow," I roared, feeling the rage finally overcome the pain. "I don't want to see either of you ever again in my life." "Mom, you're being hysterical," Michael approached again, and for a moment I feared he would push me again. "Tomorrow? When you've calmed down, we'll talk more calmly." "There's nothing to talk about." My voice had turned icy, controlled, dangerous. "You have shown exactly who you are. Now leave." Jessica took Michael's hand and murmured something in his ear. He nodded and looked at me with an expression I will never forget. Contempt mixed with determination. "All right, Mom. We'll give you time to reconsider, but this isn't over. We are going to fight for what is fair, for what Jessica deserves. And if we have to use other methods to protect our interests," Jessica added in a sweet but threatening voice, "we will. There are many ways to prove that an elderly person is not fit to manage such a valuable property." The threat was crystal clear. If I didn't hand over my house voluntarily, they would try to have me declared mentally incompetent to take it from me legally. I watched them leave my house, heard their car engine fade into the distance, and was left alone in my devastated living room. The dirty party dishes were scattered on all the tables. The balloons were starting to deflate, and the smell of the cake had become nauseating. I collapsed onto my Italian leather sofa, and for the first time in 67 years of life, I cried as if the world had ended, because in a way, it had. The world where I had a son who loved me had died that afternoon, but as I cried, something else began to grow inside me. Something I had never felt before. A cold, calculating, relentless rage. If they wanted a war, they would get one. But they had no idea who they were messing with. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat on my sofa, surrounded by the wreckage of the party I had planned with so much love, feeling my world crumble piece by piece. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's look of contempt, heard Jessica's poisonous words. I relived the humiliation of being on the floor while 30 people judged me in silence. At 3 in the morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I got up, went to my room, pulled a suitcase from the closet, and began to pack. I wasn't going to stay in this house one more night, feeling like a prisoner in my own home, waiting for them to arrive with legal papers to strip me of everything. As I folded my clothes with trembling hands, I remembered my sister Grace's words from the week before. "Evelyn, if you ever need to escape from something, my home is always open." I called a taxi at 5 in the morning and left my house just as it was, with the dirty dishes, the deflated balloons, the half-eaten cake rotting on the table. Let Michael and Jessica see the result of their cruelty. Let them smell the rot of what they had destroyed. The drive to Grace's house on the coast took 2 hours. The entire way, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Michael called 17 times. Jessica 5, the messages they left oscillated between fake concern and veiled threats. "Mom, where are you?" "We're worried." "Evelyn, we came back to your house and you're not here. This is very irresponsible of you." "Mom, if you don't show up, we'll have to call the police." I turned off the phone when I arrived at my sister's house. Grace opened the door in her robe, her hair tousled and a worried look on her face. When she saw me standing on her doorstep with a suitcase and eyes swollen from crying, she didn't ask a single question. She just hugged me and murmured, "Come in, sister. You're safe here." Her house smelled of fresh coffee and sea salt. The windows looked directly out onto the ocean, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could fully breathe. I sat in her kitchen while she made breakfast, and slowly, my voice broken with pain, I told her everything that had happened. Grace listened in silence, but I saw her expression harden with every detail. When I finished recounting the push and the public humiliation, she slammed her fist on the table. "That bastard," she muttered through clenched teeth. "That son of a dared to push you." "Grace, he's my son," I whispered through the words tasted like ash. "No," she looked at me with eyes full of determination. "A son doesn't do that. What you have is a stranger who shares your blood." I spent 3 days at my sister's house, sleeping for the first time in months without nightmares, waking up to the sound of the waves instead of the terror of facing another day of manipulation. But on the morning of the 4th day, Grace came into my room with a serious expression. "Evelyn, you need to see this," she said, handing me her tablet. On the screen was a Facebook post from Jessica. The photo showed her and Michael embracing in front of my house with a smile that chilled me to the bone. The text read, "With heavy hearts, we're sharing that Grandma Evelyn is going through an emotional crisis and has disappeared from her home. We are very concerned for her mental well-being and ask for your prayers. We've had to temporarily move into her house to look after the property while we wait for news." The comments were worse. Dozens of people expressing concern for my deteriorating mental state and congratulating Michael and Jessica for being so responsible and loving by taking care of my property in my absence. "They've already moved in," I murmured, feeling my heart break all over again. "Read the comments," Grace said in a somber voice. I scrolled down and found comments from the party guests. Each one told a distorted version of what had happened. Poor Michael, his mom became very aggressive. Evelyn was always very possessive. It's so sad when elderly parents become irrational with money. Jessica had orchestrated a perfect smear campaign. In less than a week, she had turned my disappearance into evidence of my mental incompetence. She had justified their occupation of my house, and she had gotten the entire community to see her as the victim of a problematic mother-in-law. Sister Grace sat next to me and took my hands. "I have something to tell you. I've been documenting everything you've told me about Michael and Jessica for the past few months." "Documenting?" I asked, confused. She pulled out a folder full of papers. "Recordings of our phone conversations where you told me about their demands for money, photos of the bruises you had after family discussions, copies of the threatening messages you sent me." "Why did you do that?" "Because I knew this was going to happen." Her eyes filled with tears. "Because I've seen how they've been manipulating and abusing you for years, and I knew that eventually they would try to take everything from you." She showed me page after page of evidence she had been collecting without my knowledge. My sister, who had always seemed so absent-minded and carefree, had been building a legal case to protect me. "Grace," I whispered, "what are we going to do?" She smiled for the first time in days, and there was something fierce in that smile. "We're going to destroy them." On Monday morning, Grace took me to the most prestigious law firm in the city. Luis Mendoza, a lawyer specializing in family law and elder abuse cases, reviewed all the documentation my sister had compiled with an increasingly grim expression. "Mrs. Evelyn," he said after examining the recordings, "photos and messages. What your son and daughter-in-law have done constitutes several crimes. Extortion threats, domestic violence, and now illegal occupation of property. But he's my son, I murmured, the words catching in my throat. And that's precisely why it's more serious, Lewis replied firmly. Family abuse is one of the most cowardly crimes that exists. We spent 3 hours planning our strategy. Lewis had investigated Jessica and discovered information that left me frozen. She had a history of petty scams and had been married twice before, always to older men who owned valuable properties. My uncle wasn't her first victim. He was her specialty. Your daughter-in-law is a professional con artist, Lewis explained, showing me the documents, and she's been training your son to be her accomplice. That afternoon, we returned to Grace's house to find 18 missed calls from Michael. The voicemails ranged from fake concern to direct threats. Mom, if you don't appear in 24 hours, we're going to report you as a missing person with mental health issues. Evelyn, your erratic behavior is forcing us to take legal action. But there was one message that broke my soul. It was from my neighbor, Mrs. Martinez. Evelyn, dear, I don't know what to believe. Michael and Jessica have been telling the whole neighborhood that you had a psychotic episode and are wandering somewhere aimlessly. They've organized volunteer searches and are talking to doctors about having you committed when you turn up. I hope you're okay. They're going to try to have me committed, he told Grace in horror. Over my dead body, my sister replied with a determination I'd never seen in her. Lewis had been clear. We had to act fast before Michael and Jessica could formalize any legal proceedings against my mental capacity. The plan was simple but effective. On Wednesday morning, when they thought they had everything under control, we would serve them with a lawsuit for illegal occupation, extortion, and domestic violence. But I wanted something more. I wanted them to pay for every humiliation, every manipulation, every tear they had wrung from me. Lewis, I told him on Tuesday night, I want you to arrange a meeting. Tell them I'm willing to negotiate. Are you sure we could lose the element of surprise? Trust me, I replied, feeling something cold and calculating settle in my chest. I want to look them in the eyes when they realize they've lost. On Wednesday at 10 in the morning, we met at Lewis' office. Michael and Jessica arrived with their own lawyer, a young man who had clearly underestimated the situation. Jessica was wearing a cream-colored dress and pearls, playing the part of the concerned daughter-in-law to perfection. Mom. Michael stood up when I entered, feigning relief. We were so worried. Where have you been? Sit down, I replied in an icy voice, not returning his fake hug. Evelyn. Jessica approached with fabricated tears. We've been so distressed. The house feels so empty without you. I'm sure it does, I replied, enjoying the confusion in their eyes at my coldness. Lewis took control of the meeting immediately. We are here to discuss the immediate eviction from Mrs. Evelyn's property and the legal actions that will follow. Their lawyer, a Ricardo Vega, laughed nervously. Eviction, Mr. Mendoza. I think there's been a misunderstanding. My clients are looking after the property of a woman who is clearly going through a mental health crisis. A mental health crisis. Lewis smiled like a predator. Interesting. Do you have any medical documentation to support that claim? Well, no, but Vega began to stammer. Because we do have documentation. Lewis placed the first folder on the table. Audio recordings where your clients threaten, extort, and emotionally blackmail my client. Michael's face turned pale. Those recordings were made without our consent. In this state, you only need one-party consent, Lewis replied with a smile. And your mother consented to every recording. Jessica finally understood this was not a friendly negotiation. Evelyn, what are you doing? We're family. Family? My voice was laced with venom. Does family push a 67-year-old woman to the floor? Does family threaten to steal houses? I never said steal, Michael protested. Lewis placed the second folder on the table. Here we have your wife's criminal record, Mr. Michael. 3 previous marriages, all with older property-owning men, islanding when she obtained valuable assets. The silence in the room was deafening. Michael looked at Jessica with growing horror. What is he talking about? Michael, honey, I can explain later, Jessica murmured. But it was too late. Your wife is a professional con artist. I continued, savoring every word. And you're her perfect puppet. A con artist. Michael turned to Jessica, his eyes filled with horror. What are they talking about? Lewis laid out photographs on the table. Jessica at her previous wedding to a 70-year-old man, property transfer documents, police reports for petty scams. Each image was a stab to the heart of my son, who began to understand the magnitude of his betrayal. Her first husband, Robert Clemente, left her his $500,000 house before he died. Mysteriously, Lewis explained in a clinical tone. Her second husband, Manuel Torres, transferred his family business to her name 3 months before she filed for divorce. The pattern is always the same: seduce, manipulate, isolate the victim from their family, and finally stripped them of everything. Jessica had gone completely pale, but was still trying to maintain her facade. That's not true, Michael. Honey, don't believe them. Is that why you pushed me away from Mom? Michael looked at her as if he were seeing a stranger. Is that why you always insisted she was selfish and possessive? Because she was. Jessica tried to stick to her story, but her voice trembled. Evelyn never accepted us as a family. I accepted you, I said with a broken voice, feeling tears threaten to return. I opened my home to you. I treated you like a daughter. I spent my savings on your happiness. And you repaid me by turning my own son against me. Lewis continued relentlessly. But here's the best part. Your daughter-in-law is not only a con artist, she's also a pathological liar. Has she told you, Michael, about her other 2 children? The world stopped. What other children? Michael mumbled. Jessica has 2 children from previous marriages who live with their grandparents because she abandoned them when they were no longer useful for her scams. Lewis showed more documents. And there's something else interesting. She was never pregnant during her marriage to you, but she lost the baby last year. Michael looked to be in shock. She was devastated for months. Psychological pregnancy or just a lie? Lewis replied. The medical records we have indicate she was never pregnant. Michael turned to Jessica with a look I had never seen in his eyes. Pure contempt, you lied about the baby. Michael, I can explain everything. Jessica started to cry, but these tears were different. Desperate, real. I love you. Everything I did was for our future. Our future? Michael shot up from his seat. Or your next scam. In that moment, I understood something terrible. My son had been a victim as much as I was. Jessica had systematically destroyed our relationship, turning him into her weapon against me. But the difference was he had chosen to believe her. He had chosen to push me. He had chosen to humiliate me. Michael, I said softly, I know she manipulated you, but you chose to push me. You chose to threaten me. You chose to humiliate me in front of 30 people. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. Mom, I didn't know. You knew you were hurting me, I interrupted. And you chose to do it anyway. Lewis placed the final documents on Theatable. Mrs. Jessica, here is an immediate eviction order. You have 24 hours to vacate the property. Any attempt to return will be considered trespassing. And here, he added, handing her another paper, you have a restraining order. You cannot come within 500 yards of my client. Jessica finally exploded. This is ridiculous. That house should be mine. I deserve it after everything I've put up with in this dysfunctional family. Her words were a gift. Lewis smiled and pointed to a small recorder on the table. Thank you for that final confession, Mrs. Jessica. Their lawyer, Ricardo Vega, stood up hastily. My clients will make no further statements. This meeting is over. But I wasn't finished. I stood up slowly, looking my son in the eyes one last time. Michael, you were the light of my life for 42 years. I raised you alone, worked 2 jobs to give you everything. I sacrificed my youth for your happiness. And when I finally needed you to defend me, you chose to push me to the ground. Mom, please. He tried to approach, but I stopped him with a look. No. My voice was as firm as steel. Some things can't be fixed. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. I hope she was worth it, Michael, because it cost a mother her son. I walked out of that office with my head held high, leaving behind 42 years of motherly love and embracing something new. My freedom. 6 months later, I sold my house for $950,000. I bought a small condo by the sea next to Grace. And with the remaining money, I started traveling the world. Paris, Rome, Tokyo. Cities I had always dreamed of seeing but had sacrificed for motherhood. I started a blog called Reborn at 67, a place where I share my story and help other older women who've endured family abuse and emotional manipulation. To my surprise, thousands of women began writing to me, each one with her own story of betrayal, control, and heartbreak. Stories of manipulative sons and toxic daughters-in-law. Stories that echoed my own pain. Since his divorce from Jessica, Michael has tried to contact me several times. But I never answered. Some wounds cut too deep to ever fully heal. Some choices leave scars that time simply can't erase. And yet, today, as I sit on a sun-warmed terrace in Santorini, watching the sky melt into shades of gold and pink over the sea, I can finally say something I never thought I would. I am happy. Truly happy. Free from toxicity. free from manipulation, free from sacrificing my peace for people who never valued it. I've learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away from those who hurt you, even if they share your blood. Family, I discovered, isn't defined by DNA. It's found in those who love, respect, and protect you without conditions. At 67, I've finally learned how to be selfish in the best possible way by choosing myself, by choosing peace.